Okay, everybody, you want to get people's attention, talk to them about aliens, okay? I used to do question and answer with a board like this. It was a smart board, you could write on it. And they'd put 3 microphones up in the aisles or 4 on Sunday nights, and for an hour and a half, people would ask questions. It was fun. They would line up. They couldn't wait to ask their question, And every question was such a blessing, but what they didn't realize is, I've done this for so many years, that I'd already heard I don't know if I've ever heard for the first time a question, because after working with young people for decades, you've heard kind of like 99% of all the questions. Well, one of them is always about aliens. And so, here's my question for you. When do the real aliens, that's the important word, the real aliens, what are aliens? They're not humans. Now, I know the Bible calls us pilgrims and strangers, aliens. What that means is spiritually, we're not like people on earth. We have a new heart, new spirit, new destination, all that. But in the context of Revelation 9, real aliens are not humans. And they're not from here. They're not from the earth. They're from somewhere else. So when do the real aliens who, if you understand biblical cosmology, everything was created by God, so everything that is talked about in the Bible, we know where it came from, and so they have to be Satan's demons, and we'll talk about what demon means and where they came from. When are they going to invade the earth? I've already seen them invade in The Avengers and a lot of other movies, But when do the real ones really invade? And it's in Revelation 9, okay? That's what we're going to study. We're still in the tribulation. We have now come to this section I showed you last hour. There is a fascination with demons. There's another topic. Aliens, demons. The Q&A that I did on aliens, I think it's been watched 1 million times by 1 million people because they're just fascinated. And the demon one is too. God opens the pit and lets humanity taste of the searing torment that Satan's demons bring. Now, remember, between the 4th seal of chapter 6 and the 6th trumpet, guess what? 25%, 33%. Now, I know it's 25% of the whole and 33% of the remainder. I know, those are you mathematicians. But just for simple math, I put down 58% of the population of that moment die. When is this happening? This is happening in these horrible trumpets that we already started on. Remember, it's silent. We covered that. And then, bang, bang, bang. There's this fire, like we've had fires recently. Bonnie and I were teaching at a Bible school in Australia in 2019, and the fires were raging in Australia. And we were in Sydney, and I mean Sydney, we were coughing. You couldn't see across the street. It was so bad, and I'm sure it was like we all were smoking packs of cigarettes. But guess what? 1/3 of all the surface of the earth is going to burn, of the green grass, of the trees. And then the mountain of fire, I had a great talk on the break about that. When it says a star falls from heaven, and falls in the sea and then falls on the waters, the Greek word for star means something out that's not on earth, it's in the sky or in space or whatever. They called everything up there stars. They couldn't differentiate until, Herschel made the first telescope. They couldn't differentiate between stars, planets, comets, you know what I mean, meteorites, asteroids. They didn't know what was what. And so that's the whole panorama. But what we're looking at right now is just this. The 5th trumpet, in the first 12 verses, demon locusts come to earth. Now, what would be the value of this? These people were living in a darkening world. Do you remember Ephesus had these traveling demon exorcisers that were coming, and Paul was showing God is greater than the demons, than the demon-possessed, than any. Did you know Paul said in his teaching that behind every idol is a demon? Okay, whenever you see a picture of a beautiful setting in Tibet or Nepal or Myanmar, Burma, whatever, and you see a big Buddha, behind every Buddha, there's a demon. Behind every idol of all of India, there's a demon there. What is that? If people want that idol to do something for them, you can bet that demon's going to do it so that they will not worship the true God. They will worship the false god of this world. So, seeing Revelation, the whole book, was every believer learning to how to live for God in a world that's getting darker and darker and darker, more demonized, more Satanized. Have you ever noticed how many movies are increasingly about either outright occult or supernatural creatures or action heroes that have supernatural power? There's a fascination with power beyond what we know about. And if there's a fascination, Satan will fill that void. And we have a whole generation that's fascinated by depictions. Now think about the four horsemen that come, you know, the bearing death and destruction. Where do we get kind of like the big picture to put the pieces together? Well, there are two chapters, and by the way, this will be on your final exam and quiz. Lucifer is the most powerful being God ever created, the smartest and the strongest of all God's creations. Everyone else is beneath him. He was the highest creature God made. His name was Lucifer, the son of the morning. By the way, this is a Latin word, lux lucius. You know, in Latin, there's the singular and the plural, lux and lucius, or the nominative and the genitive. I can't remember. It's been decades since they took Latin. But Lucifers used to be what they called matches. They called matches Lucifers because when you went like this, they lit up. So lux means light. So Lucifer is the light one. Paul calls him what? The angel of what? Light in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Where did Lucifer come from? Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 tell us. He was the worship leader of heaven. Wow. It's very interesting when you read this. He was totally involved with music, musical instruments. He was totally involved with the worship of God. In fact, he had the best view. The throne of God was here, and it says he was the covering cherub. At that time, he spread out. We know what he looked like, remember? He has 4 faces, and he has 6 wings. And with, 2 he flies, and with 2 he covers him. It's all in the scriptures. He's one of them, covered with eyes. And he used to use his wings kind of like a big parabolic umbrella over the throne of God, so that all the worship coming at God reflected off him back down onto God. Great system. But what it tells us in Isaiah 14 is he got intoxicated by the worship. He liked it. He started wanting to absorb a little of it instead of reflect it all, having all that adoration and everything. And so you can read the story. But the fall of Lucifer to become Satan is in 2 places in the Bible, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Okay, here's a quiz. Everyone close your eyes right now. Close your eyes. No peeking. What are the 2 chapters where the fall of Satan is? Say them out loud. Good, you can open your eyes. Look again. Now you've said it, you've heard it, you've read it, you'll get it on the quiz. Now, Lucifer, when he fell, chapter 12, we're coming to, we're not there yet, tells us a secret. 1/3 of all the angels, there's 1 billion angels, there's probably more, but let's say there's 1 billion of them. There are hundreds of millions just standing. So there are probably more than 1 billion. There are billions, but if there was 1 billion, 1/3 of them, 333 million, went with Satan. 2/3 stayed with God. Now, I don't have a pen, but if I had my pen, when I was a youth pastor, I always had a pen. I don't even have one. But I would take my pen, and I would hold it here, and I would kind of, in the palm of my hand, keep the pen so it was standing up straight. And I'd say, everybody wonders how Satan fell. And there's a whole division of theology about did God create evil? Did God cause evil? Did God allow evil? Did God plan evil? You know, and it's called, the main division is called lapsarianism. You ever heard of such thing? And there is infralapsarianism and supralapsarianism and sublapsarianism. And what that is about is whether God planned for Satan to fall before it happened, or as it was happening, infra, or before, supra, or after, sub. I mean, there are books this thick about what I just said. Do you think young people want to hear all that? So I would take my pen, okay, and I'd stick it in my hand, and I'd say, watch. And my little pen would be standing up in my hand. And I'd say, watch what happens when I stop holding my pen up. What would happen to the pen? Fell. Did I cause it to fall? Yes, I stopped holding it. Do you know why Satan fell? God allowed him. God stopped holding him. Remember, none of us are self-sufficient. None of us are righteous. None of us are good. Even the angels were good in the sense that they were good, but they're held. This whole universe, anything that's not God, infinite, eternal, holy, all those 25 attributes, anything that's not that must be held. Jonathan Locke is going to teach you systematic theology. Okay. Yes, ma'am. That's why there's books this big. No, we all want to know what's not written down. What does Deuteronomy 29:29 say? Anybody know? Have you guys memorized that one yet? Deuteronomy 29:29 says this: the secret things belong to God, but what has been revealed belongs to us in our generation. So that question is something God does not tell us. That's why there are books this thick. But what we do know is that God does this at other times, not hold people. Did you know it says that God let go at different times in the monarchy when you're studying all those kings, Jeroboam the first, Jeroboam the second, and, Azariah and Uzziah and Pereziah and all those, there's Hoshea and Pekah, all these strange names. Do you know what it says in one of them? It says God stepped aside for a minute with King Hezekiah. And you know what it says? When the Babylonian envoy came to see what was in his heart. What that means is God stopped holding and causing him to, what it says in Ezekiel 28, 36 and 37 says, a new heart also I'll give you, a new spirit I'll put within you. I'll take away the stony heart. I'll put my spirit within you, and I will cause you to keep my commandments. Cause. God stopped causing Hezekiah for a moment just to see what he'd do. You know what he did? He got very proud and showed off all of his gold and silver and treasures to the Babylonians. And guess what they did? They came and took them all. And God said, I let you show what was in your heart. And without me, you become proud. Without God, Satan became proud. What does Satan say? 5 times in Isaiah 14. He says, I will ascend to the mountain. I will become like the Most High. Become like? That's how we know the Bible was written by God, not by humans. If I was writing the Bible, I would say Satan said, I'm going to become greater than God. But Satan's too smart for that. He knew he was a creature. He knew he didn't have self-existence. He said, nothing can be greater than God, so I'm just going to become like God. And that is another evidence of inspiration. Ezekiel explains even more, but that's not, both those books were not in. So let's get back to Revelation. Look at Revelation 9:1. Okay? And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven. Remember, anything that comes from out there is a star. It's glowing, and it's not on earth. It's in the Greek word star is something up in the sky. It could be a meteorite, it can be anything. Now it's an angel. I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. And to him, so we know it's a person, was given the key. So on earth, there is a place, look at this, to the bottomless pit. Oh, this is going to be so much fun to get into. Number one, the most powerful creatures in the universe and the only aliens out there in space we're going to start meeting. These are super angels. By the way, there are many kinds of angels. And guess what? God has a maximum security cosmic being, real aliens prison. And it's on earth. The Bible says so. Now, how did all this happen? Okay, this is angelology. It's one of the divisions of systematic theology. You know, like there's theology proper, that's theologia, the study of God. There's eschatology, eschatos, last things, study. There is pneumatology, pneuma, spirit, study of the spirit. There is angelology. That's what this is. What does the Bible say about angels? Number one, God created all angels. And by the way, 2/3 of them obey and serve him. But 1/3, when we get to chapter 12, we're going to see rebelled from God, and they in two groups. There's one group that are still rebelling. There's one group that's in prison. But most of them are not in prison. They're causing problems. Everywhere Jesus went, they were causing problems. Remember that? I mean, they were throwing themselves on the ground and making people writhe and foam at the mouth and scream and shriek and disrupt the services. Everything. Anything to disrupt Jesus. They're very active. And they're active with you. Paul tells very cosmopolitan people in Ephesus that there are flaming darts that Satan and his demons can shoot. They cannot indwell you, but they can influence us. And they can shoot in a flaming arrow, and if we have lust in our lives, desires that are ungodly, they inflame. It's kind of like if your dad has old rags that he, does furniture repair in, and all those solvents that he wipes and polishes the furniture, if he throws them all into a barrel, those are all petroleum distilled products that are very flammable. And if you threw a cigarette, you shouldn't have one, but if you did throw one, or a match, it would go pfft. That's exactly what Satan can do in our lives. If we have old rags of our old lusts and desires that are ignitable, we're hiding them, Satan sees them, and he, Paul said, can shoot a flaming dart in. So these demons are very active. They know. By the way, demons know everything. Demons have been around since creation. They don't die. They can go through walls. The word daimon, demon, comes from the Greek concept of a daimon, and a daimon is an intelligent spirit. Demons are everywhere in Greek mythology. Daimons are these demigods that they're smart, they can go through walls, they can hear you, they know every language. How long does it take for a baby to learn English? A couple years. These demons are thousands of years old. They know every language spoken on earth. They've seen everything. They know where the pharaohs hid all the stuff in the pyramids. They even know where Oak Island's treasures are. They know where Blackbeard hid his stuff because they were there on the boat. Demons are everywhere. They're not stopped. They're spirits. They can be everywhere, but they are a demon, an intelligence. They're like an unending supercomputer. They see everything. They process it. They know it. That's why they're so good at fortune telling. They don't know the future, but boy, they know everything that's going on, and they can tell you what's going to happen before it happens because they saw it coming that you didn't. So demons are really very powerful. Okay, what does the Bible teach us? Every angel we read about in God's Word has a power that exceeds anything we can humanly understand. and possible by the laws of the physical world. I mean, they exceed the physical realm in every way. Why is that important? Because God is absolutely almighty. He's all-powerful, greater than everything that's anywhere, because he made it all. So remember, every time you read about the occult or demonism or whatever, and you say, oh, that's so horrible, it's so powerful, you think, oh, but greater is he that's in us than Satan that's in this world and his demons. So the more we understand of Satan's realm, the more powerful we see God is. And that's important. So basically, what are the real aliens that swirl around us? God explains there are many types of angels and demons, and here they are. First of all, angels, all of them, are supernatural, super powerful creatures. Now think about what the Bible tells us. As far as we know, they're indestructible. That's really interesting. So Frank Peretti, you don't even know him, but boy, he sold so many books in the 90s. And he talked about demons, and you'd finally destroy one and they'd blow up. As far as we know from the Bible, they're indestructible, they can't be killed, they can't be destroyed. They travel the universe effortlessly. They don't need spaceships, they don't rest, they don't sleep. As far as we know, they don't even eat. Now, remember, they're not self-sufficient. God allows them to do all that. In fact, the book of Job 1 and 2 tells us that God allows demons to come in front of him, and more than that, Satan himself. And Satan comes in front of God to accuse us. Satan's introduced in the book of Job, accusing Job. Says, God, look at Job. God says, I'm watching Job. I know all about Job. What do you want to know about Job? And he says, if I make him sick, he'll curse you. If I kill his children, he'll curse you. If I make his wife mad at him, he'll curse you. And God says, you can do anything you want except kill him. And what does Satan do? What does Satan do? Satan is able to stir up a tribe of people to come through and maraud and take all of Job's flocks and kill his herdsmen. And then Satan stirs up what we would call a tornado, a violent wind that comes out of the wilderness and destroys the home where Job's 10 children are having dinner. That's like a tornado. You see, then what does he do? Satan causes physical boils, big, horrible sores all over Job's body. Did you know Satan can cause diseases? Did you know Satan controls the weather of this planet? With God's limitations, Satan is the god of this world. Ephesians 2:1 says that. He is the prince of the power of the air. Ephesians 2:2 says that. He is the one that is doing all this, and John said in 1 John 5, the whole world lies in the lap of the devil. So Satan is very powerful, but God allows him to exist. Angels, there are 5 levels of them. The Bible describes at length. Lucifer, the guardian, the anointed cherub, the cherubim. Lucifer was the highest cherub. There are many other cherubs. They're the ones with all the eyes and faces. The archangels, there are 7 archangels that always stand, Revelation tells us, facing the throne of God. 7 of them. They're shown as flames, and they're dispatched to do things. We only know 2 of them, Michael, Gabriel. Now the Jewish sages have named all of them, Raphael and Uriel and all that, but the Bible doesn't tell us that. So if it's not in the Bible, you say, oh, that's interesting. It's kind of like it's in Encyclopedia Britannica, but it's not truth from God. Then there are the seraphim. We bump into them in Isaiah 6. Literally, seraphim means the flames, and then there are just angels. But yet one angel's power exceeds anything we know humanly possible. Okay. Now, the other side, there's even more of them described. The angel of light is what Satan is now. He has as his greatest lieutenant the destroyer. We'll talk about him in just a minute. Then there are the horrible monsters of the destroyer that are going to come out of the pit in chapter 9 in a minute. Then there are the ones that are in prison, the doomed angels that got in trouble at the flood. And what they did, we're not sure of, but Peter infers they were involved in sexual sins, that they were trying to destroy the genetic, the DNA line of humanity so that Christ could not redeem them. because Jesus only died for humans, not for angels or anything else. Daniel tells us about, so Peter tells us about these doomed ones that are chained in prison. Daniel tells us in chapter 10 about nation princes. There's a prince of Persia. There still is a prince of Persia. They've changed the name of Persia to Iran, but Prince of Persia is not a movie. I mean, it is a movie, a Disney movie or something, but there really is an angel that is driving events in Persia or Iran. There's a prince of Greece. Boy, was he in overdrive when Alexander was expanding across the world. And on it goes. There are nation princes that Daniel tells us about. Then Paul makes this cryptic reference to principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness of this age and spiritual hosts of wickedness. Are those all different classes, or are they just job descriptions? Are they, you know what I mean? So we don't know, but there they are. What we see is demons are highly organized in the rebellion against God. And then there are just normal demons, just like there are just normal angels. But basically, when you think about this, God is greater than the sum of everything he created. So everything they discover about the universe, everything we are discovering about the earth, and everything just now we talked about in the spiritual world, God is greater than all of that combined. But what can demons do? See, that's the big thing that most people don't ponder. Well, Revelation tells us the first thing. When demons are allowed to become predators, they can inflict tortures. So look at verse 6. In those days, men will seek death, but will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. Why is that? Verse 5. To these creatures, they were not given authority to kill people, Revelation 9:5, but to torment them. So these are those creatures I showed you that are coming out of the pit, and they are incarcerated because they're so dangerous. I mean, normal demons are bad. They can inhabit people, control people, sicken people. When I was in seminary, I went to school with an Arizona state trooper. He was in school too, Bible school. He was an AHP, Arizona Highway Patrol, and he said they always carried their shotguns, and he said there was a man that came at them, and he had just killed someone, and the police came up, and that man came straight at them, horrible as it is, with his knife coming to attack his partner, and he had his knife, and he stabbed the partner, and this guy in Bible school said it was the awfulest thing. He said, but I just racked my shotgun. He said, I went, boom, shot him, right, the stabber. Shot him with my shotgun. And he said he turned and looked at me, and he said, and started coming toward me. So he said, he said he never stopped. He said he was so high on drugs. He was so intent on that. He said, I wasn't even a Christian. And he said, I looked in the eyes of this person, and he said it was like it wasn't a person coming at me. Well, we already know what that is. Satan came to kill and steal and destroy. His demons want to empower people to kill and steal and destroy. Our culture is grappling with the effects of drugs. What does a drug do? A drug is to open your mind so that, especially the high-end ones, so that you are in this euphoria, and so that you see things and experience things, and your mind, the most powerful part of your body that we only use like 10% of, all of a sudden all 100% of it's just going wild. Yeah, that's what drugs do. But what's the portal between the physical world and the spiritual world? The mind. That's where we seek God. That's where we pray. The connector, the portal, the cable, the HDMI that goes between earth and the spiritual world is your mind. And if you put drugs in that, and all of your normal resistance to the paranormal and supernatural gets put down, you don't have any fears, it's just like opening the doors to the demons. And there is so much connection between the effects of drugs and the demonization of people, which is going to go in chapter 9. We'll see it in just a minute. Point number 4. What happens when the real destroyer is unleashed? Look at verse 11. This is the worst. And they has king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has a name, Apollyon. So all these lesser monsters have a worse monster that's over them. Okay, let's study him for just a second. He's all the way through the Bible. I will talk about him in Exodus 12:23, but he's in 2 Samuel 24. Do you remember the angel that came and killed 70,000 people in one stroke with David? In 1 Corinthians 10:10, he's the one that God uses when the children of Israel are causing trouble and complaining, and God killed them all rapidly. And in Revelation 9, he's right here. His name is the destroyer. Hebrew word, Abaddon. Greek word translating that's in the manuscript is Apollyon. When they translate into Hebrew, it's Abaddon. When they translate Apollyon into English, it's destroyer, but it's the same creature. What could he do? What did he do in Exodus 12? In one night, God let him out of the pit, and he could tell in the dark, with no night vision goggles, no sniper scope, no Black Hawk helicopters, no drones, no DNA test kits. He went systematically in one night through the homes where millions of people were living, and he found in the dark, while they were sleeping, the firstborn child. Did you know the American military, with our $1 trillion budget, could never do that today in one night? They could do it in a few weeks. If they lined everybody up, did a genetic test of the family, they could figure out and look at their cells who was the firstborn. That angel in one night did the whole nation of Egypt. And he didn't just get the children. He went through the stables. Do you read? Do you read what it says? In fact, we should read what it says. I mean, it is scary to read the power of this destroyer. Do you see why God keeps him in the pit? That's why Jesus said, if I didn't control all this, no one would survive. For the Lord will pass through and strike Egypt, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and the doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come. And so when he did so, verse 29, and it came to pass at midnight, the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on the throne, the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, the firstborn of the livestock. Every firstborn child and every firstborn beast. That would even be harder than the child to find the firstborn of the animals, the destroyer. So one angel that's kept in the pit by the name of destroyer did that. And God lets him out in all of his hosts. What happens? Well, it's the greatest loss of human life. Trumpet 6. Now, this is real important to differentiate. A lot of people get all mixed up on this. You can always tell a prophecy book whether they're really studying the Bible or just sensationalizing, because Trumpet 6 releases 4 demons allowed by God to lead a demonic army that numbers 200 million. How many of you have heard the 200 million horsemen? I mean, we've all heard of that. And what immediately happens? People say, and that's how many are in the army of China. Always. Wait a minute. That's not the same event. This is Trumpet 6. 200 million horsemen destroy 1/3 of all remaining humans. This event is not to be confused with a later human army launched by trumpet number 7 that is led by demons in Revelation 16:12 that's going to go destroy Jerusalem and fight against God at Armageddon. It's 2 separate things. One is an army of demons, led by demons. The other is an army of humans, led by demons. So and the Antichrist. Okay, number 6, and this is where we have to get so that we can finish this up. Look at chapter 9, and I want to show you starting in verse 20. But the rest of mankind, the ones that don't get killed by these demon monsters, the ones that have survived the plagues, the ones that have survived the water pollution and the sun scorching, who were not killed by the plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons. Remember how Paul said every idol has a demon behind it. So these people are still worshiping idols with demons. Only they actually are saying, my idol represents a demon and I worship this demon, because they like the demons. Idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. Secondly, they did not repent of their murders. So the world is going to be demonized at the crescendo of the tribulation. And they're going to be murderous. That's why every time we have another Louisville shooting like yesterday, it reminds me it's only going to get worse. It's going to get so bad that the whole world is characterized by, everyone is characterized by demonism, murder. Look at verse 21, sorceries. Interesting Greek word. If I had my marker board up here, I'd write it down. There, I'll write it for you right now. There, pharmakeia. Does that sound like a word you know in English? What does pharmakeia sound like? Pharmacy. Good. This is a word for drugs. Always in history. Do you know what they just found last week? They were digging some cave somewhere in France, and it corresponded with the cave they were looking at somewhere in East Asia, and they said they found evidence that ancient cave dwellers used psychedelic drugs in their worship, their ecstatic worship. Drugs have always been a part of humanity's quest. The Indians had their peyote. They had what they called loco weed, which we would call, hashish. I mean, they've always had all of their stuff. What's sorceries? When you affect your mind by drugs, you open the portal. It's like living in a swamp infested with malaria, super mosquitoes, and cutting all the screens of your house. What will happen? The mosquitoes are going to come looking for getting your blood. When you let down the guard of the mind, you're inviting in the demons. And boy, the whole world is sorceries. They're involved in pharmakeia. They're involved in drugs. They've opened their minds, their bodies, their lives. And so what's next? Their sexual immorality. When people can do anything they want, the way we're wired is, we just get worse. You know what the worst thing God can do? Let you do whatever you want. That's what Romans 1 says. God gave them over to do whatever they wanted. Everybody they think that's the ultimate thing in life. If I could just do a startup, if I could be like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whoever, and if I could just invent something and make millions of dollars in Bitcoin or something, I'd finally be happy because I could do anything I want. You will not be happy if you do anything you want. You'll only be happy if you do anything God wants. We want our own way. You get your own way, you'll be if you can get your own way, we all here would be murderous, sorcery, demonized, sexually immoral thieves. Because chapter 9, 20 and 21 is when everyone gets to do anything they want. And Satan is so powerful, and his demons are so prevalent, and sin is much more powerful than you realize. Sin is so powerful, the only thing that can stop us is God. And if he doesn't hold us, we just get worse and worse and worse. That's why I started 2 classes ago saying the greatest thing we can do is invite the ultimate kingdom in and say, I want to seek first the kingdom of God. I want God to rule in my life. I want his righteousness. I want his spirit permeating my life. I don't want a self-flesh-led life to grieve and quench the spirit. I don't want to do anything to quench him. I need him to keep me. What do the last 2 verses of Jude say? Jude 9, 23 and 24. What does it say? Now unto him, it's a doxology. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling, and to present you faultless before his presence with exceeding great joy. To the only wise God, to whom be glory and majesty, dominion, and power forever. Did you catch that part? Who is able to keep you from falling. The most powerful creature, the most brilliant creature God ever made. As long as he held him, he was great. But when God wanted to see what his greatest creation would do if he just let go of him, we got Satan. I don't want God to let go of me. He doesn't want to let go of me. But what he asked me to do is every day to say sin is so powerful, I'm not going to manage it myself. I'm going to ask you to use your grace, Titus 2:11-13. The grace of God that saved you teaches you to deny ungodliness and worldly lusts. So grace teaches me how to say no to that powerful sin that's always around me. Okay, God reminds us he's in control. Let's get to chapter 10 or we'll never get done. And I have 4 left in 10 minutes. I might make history and be done. Look at 10. I saw another mighty angel coming from heaven. We're in Revelation 10. Clothed with a cloud, with a rainbow on his head, with a face like sun. And it's starting to sound like Revelation 1, isn't it? Face like the sun and his feet like pillars of fire. Doesn't it sound like Revelation 1? Jesus is never portrayed as an angel in the New Testament. He is in the Old Testament, but Jesus is not an angel in the New Testament. Okay? So this angel is at the front end of this whole new section where God is showing his absolute control over everything, and we're going to take it apart piece by piece. But it opens with this mighty angel with the rainbow and face like the sun, and he's got a little book open in his hand, and he puts one foot on the sea and one foot on the land, and he cries out like thunder. Sounds like Revelation again, voice like thunder, you know. And so everybody thinks this is Jesus, but Jesus is never portrayed as an angel in the New Testament, only in the Old Testament. After his incarnation, he's no longer the pre-incarnate Christ showing up as the angel of the Lord or the Christophany or all that stuff. But what do we see in his hand? He's got this little book. Now, little book, this is the same word that's used for a scroll. We haven't turned to this. This isn't what he was holding. He was holding a biblos, which is a rolled up scroll. Why they translated it? It's just translated that back then books were scrolls and scrolls were books. And so we have to think about, what he's doing is he's bringing back this title deed. And he's saying, God's plans are sweet, you know, that he's going to save all that call on him, and he's going to keep them, and they're going to heaven, they're getting a white robe, and they're going to be perfectly satisfied forever, and it's sour. That he's going to destroy 1/4 of humanity in a swoop, and that all who won't repent of their sins are going to pay for their sins forever. What are the lessons for us? Well, categorically, always the same. Resist. Resist Satan, who is the serpent with the Garden of Eden with Eve, who is the devil that tempted Christ in the wilderness, who is the deceiver that is permeating the world today, who is the dragon we're going to see in chapter 12, who is the one accusing the saints that we saw in Job 1 and 2, and I told you about it. He's alive and he's very busy. And by the way, what is he doing? Well, real quickly, Bonnie and I were ministering at a conference, and it was an amazing conference, and I was teaching my heart out. They asked me to speak on spiritual warfare. And again, it was all those medical missionary doctors. There were hundreds of them. At that one, there were 840 medical missionaries. And I was teaching my heart out, and all of a sudden, after one of the sessions, I taught every morning for 2 weeks, and then Bonnie and I were spiritual life care during the day for the missionaries. But at one meal, one of those doctors in his little footies and his scrubs came up to me, and he pulled out of his pocket a little moleskin. I don't know, there are moleskin notebooks, you know, leather notebooks that are little that fit in your back pocket. They're like a 3x5 notebook. And he went, and he pulled it out, and he said, "You're in my book." I said, you know, what do you say to people you've never met that just strike up a conversation and talk about you? You know, I just always smile and say, "Wow, that's great. What does that mean? You know, what does it mean I am in your book? You know, is that good or bad?" Well, he said, "I'm a doctor. I work in the ISIS region where ISIS is rampant." And this was like 3 years ago, so ISIS was really rampant. And he says, I live there with my family. He said, I have my wife, and he said, I have my 3 little stair-step daughters, and they all have blonde hair just like my wife. And he said, and I'm a doctor, and he says, we live on the American NATO base that's fighting ISIS. He said, but the school where my wife teaches, the mission school where my wife teaches and where my children go is like 5 miles from the base, but it's in the safe territory. But he said, you never know what ISIS is doing. So he says, every day I drive, I go through the gates with the 50 caliber machine guns protecting me in my little car, and I drive 5 miles to the very unprotected mission school, and I leave my wife and my 3 daughters, and then I drive back. He said, when I get back to the hospital, what often happens to me is, I'm a surgeon, he says, I start going to get prepped for surgery. You know, they wash their hands and they put on the gloves and, you know, all this stuff they do. And he said, all of a sudden, darkness. He said, I don't think anybody else sees it, but he says, it's like ink. And he said, I become like I'm drowning in darkness. And he says, I know immediately what it is. He said, because I'm so afraid that ISIS is going to intercept me driving, either to pick up or deliver my kids, and that they're going to capture my wife and do what they do to women, and they're going to take my 3 daughters and do what they do to children, which is auction them off, you know, and sell them to be sex slaves. And he said, and that is in the back of my mind, and I constantly fear that. And he said, now my book. He said, so I have not been able to do surgery because I get so afraid and paralyzed, and this inky darkness fills my mind and my soul. He said, what I do is I run into the only quiet room in the hospital, which is the bathroom, and he says, I turn the lock, and he said, I pull that little book. He says, you're in it, and I'm waiting to see what that means. And he says, anytime I hear someone teach on a verse from the Bible that is about impacting in spiritual warfare, he says, I write down the verse and I listen, and when I get done listening to the whole message, I write a prayer, a real to-the-point prayer based on that verse. And he said, I keep it in my pocket. And he said, as soon as I get totally paralyzed and feel I'm in the dark, he said, I lock myself in that little bathroom, that little tiny room. He said, I pull out my little book in my pocket. He said, I don't have time to flip through the whole Bible and try and find a verse. I've written 1 verse on each page. And he said, I read the first verse out loud. And then out loud, I pray that prayer. And I turn the page and I read the next verse out loud. And then out loud, I pray that prayer. He said, usually I get through 2 or 3 of them and I feel it's like a curtain rising. And he said, and finally, he said, by the time I get to the next one, he said, I'm just thanking the Lord that greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And I had been teaching on, of course, spiritual warfare. Then I was teaching on clothing ourselves. Remember I talked to you about the first day. I said to you, how do you think I got this shirt that my wife ironed? It didn't just come on me. I chose to put it on. And that's what Colossians 3 says. And it says we choose to clothe ourselves with Christ. And we choose to put on the armor. And you know what he told me? He said, your message today, he said, it was your opening line. He said, you read a verse and commented on it. And he said, that set me off. I looked that verse up, I wrote it in there, and I wrote my prayer the rest of the time. He said, what else did you speak on? He said, I never listened to anything else. Do you know what he told me? You're in my book. You know what that told me? Spiritual warfare is a lot more than most of us think. And some of you go through that darkness and that paralysis. Are you getting ready? How do we get ready? Well, we need to get our spiritual body armor on. We need to get protected. And the way we do that is the discipline of the Scriptures. We read the Word because it's the only way to live. Jesus said, man should not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. We memorize the Word because Joshua 1:8 says it's the only way to prosper. Then you will be prosperous and have good success in anything you do. And then we meditate on the Word. And that's what Jeremiah 15:16 says. It's the only way to have that joy, which is the only way we can invade our world in being a little example of Christ. And so, when do the real aliens, Satan's demons, invade the earth? In Revelation 9. But right now, they're shooting arrows at us. And are you ready?